Today's task is to make throttle cables for the BMW. I'm going to use a self-made bird caging tool and a self-made honeypot. So very basic tools, but the process was a success because it worked. So let me show you how. I've just received the new outer tubes for the throttle cables. I had to wait for those to arrive because initially I wanted to use the generic Van Hill throttle kit, which is amazing because it comes with a lot of accessories. So basically everything that you need to make your own throttle cables is in there. But I've spent hours trying to route these outer tubes without pinching them or touching the tank or rubbing anywhere. And it didn't work. Only after I've tried every possible solution, I noticed that the 6mm outer tubes from Van Hill are a lot less flexible than the 5mm outer tubes that are on the BMW. So with the more flexible 5mm outer tube, we will be able to run the original throttle routing, which also works good with the upgraded Tomaselli throttle grip. And if you want to have a look at any of the parts that I use on the BMW build, then check out the build sheet, first link down below in the description. The first thing that we need to do is to decide which end caps we need for the outer tube. If you have the Van Hill kit as well, you just need to select which ones fit inside your throttle housing. If you don't have that, just measure the inside of the throttle housing or have a look if you have a thread or something like that and see if you can determine which one you need to order. I already did that and I have two pieces in here, which I'm going to show you in just a second. When we choose the right end pieces here, we have to make sure that the routing is good so that the Bowden cable doesn't hit the tank or rub anywhere or get pinched. And also we have to make sure that it doesn't get pulled in any of the ranges of the handlebar. So those are very important things. But once you have that, we can move down to the carb side. And here on the BMW, we just have the adjustment screw. So we only need to find a fitting end cap for the outer tube that can go into the adjustment screw. So let me quickly show you what I've used and also transfer those two pieces onto the new outer tube so we can actually measure the correct length. I want to use this bend angle. So I have to use this little transition piece in between that fits into the bend angle. And then the 6mm end cap slides right in. On the opposite side, we have this adjustment screw that sits inside the carb and the end cap that goes right in there. Now let's use the new outer tube to get the routing right. But what I noticed, the ends look terrible, so we have to clean this up in a second, but I'm going to do that when I cut the other side as well. What I'm going to do is I'm going to cut two pieces, each 10 centimeters longer than the original Bowden cables. And for cutting the outer tube, I just use an angle grinder and a regular cut-off disc. After cutting the outer tubes, you might have to go in there with a pointy tool and deburr the edges a little bit. And if it's really rough, like on this one right here, you can use a small file and just file that flat. The small file is also very handy to go around the edge and just clean that up so the end cap goes on easier. And since this is my first time doing this, I just thought it might be a good idea to do a test run with one of the end caps, because if I need to redo it, I still have enough slack in the outer tube so I can just cut it off and do it again. I bought a small tool for that. This is more like a DIY tool and this is supposed to crimp on the end cap. So let's quickly try this out, and I'm going to link you the shop where I bought everything down below. It's a German shop, but maybe it's good for reference, or maybe it even works out with the shipping fees. So let's give this one a try. From the shape, I suppose this goes in the vise and then the Bowden cable goes through here and then you just squeeze the cap onto the outer tube. And that's pretty solid on there. So that's nice that that works. Now it's the next step. I need to take off these adjustment screws so I can put them back in the carbs. And here I can quickly show you these pliers, which are especially made for cutting Bowden cables without damaging them. They look like this. I'm going to link them down below in the description. And then you just snap this off. And there we have the adjustment screw. I'm quickly going to put these back in the carbs and then we can determine the length starting from the top. All right, so the routing goes like this, from the throttle through this little triangle in the frame and then into the bracket that I've made for the vape system parts. And then one comes across and the other one goes to the left side of the bike. Now I just need to quickly put on the tank so that we can check for clearance. This part is a little bit tricky because the cables have to come out kind of angling towards the front. Naturally, they would like to go like this, but then one of them is touching the tank, so I need to address that. And I think I'm going to do that by putting in two little lock screws right here. So now that I know that I have enough slack at the top right here, it's just a matter of getting this one lined up and then marking that position. Van Hill said to give this about 5mm of extra slack. So we're going to add 5mm once we cut it. I'm just doing a quick double check to be sure that everything actually fits. Now that the outer tubes fit, we can work on the inner cables, and for that we have to do the same. We have to figure out the end pieces that we need. Let's quickly disassemble the throttle body so we can see which nipple we need that hooks in here. And this one is probably a very common one, I think. So that one is the right one for the Tomaselli throttle grip. Just make sure that it fits snug and that you can fit two if you have two Bowden cables. And then for the carb side, I'm just gonna double check with the piece that I've cut off. So this one is the nipple that was on the original cables. And that looks pretty much the same like the one that also goes on the top. If you don't have the original cable anymore, then just check at the carb where the cable hooks in. So we're going to use the same one on all four ends. And then in the Van Hill kit, there is the same nipple that is screwable. So we can finish one side of the cable, then run it through and then hook the screwable one into the carb side, lock it down, and then we know exactly where to cut. If you don't have this kit with a screwable nipple, don't worry, you will still know where to cut it, but this is just a nice addition. For the inner wire, we're going to use 7x7 Bowden cable. 7x7 just means that they have first taken 7 very small strands, twisted them up, and then 7 of those bundles again twisted together, and that gives you a very flexible Bowden cable which you can use for throttle cables. For clutch and brake cables you want to use 1x19, which is a lot more rigid and stronger. Now to solder on the end caps you need a few supplies, and if I'm not mistaken you're supposed to use the solder that is for copper pipes and not the one that is for electrical connections. So I got everything from the special Bowden cable shop, so I suspect that they sell the right stuff. This one says on the label SSN97AG3, and then I also got some liquid flux because we are going to use the honeypot method. And also from my research, this is the best method that you can use. Some people also like to do it like this, where they put the nipple on top, heat up the nipple, and then feed solder in from the top. And a lot of people that I've watched say they never had problems with that. So it seems to work, but you run the risk of heating up the cable too much or even feeding solder down into the cable. And if any of those two things happen, then you create a weak point right behind the nipple where the cable can actually break relatively easily. So the honeypot method avoids that problem. And then for the honeypot, you can either buy one on eBay for like 20, 30 bucks, something like that, or you make your own little brick. For that, you can use a hut nut. You need to get a relatively big hut nut. Mine is too small for the nipples that I have to use, so I can't use this. But if you get one, then you just use some welding wire to keep it upright, feed the solder in, and that works great. Since I can't use that, I have made another little DIY honeypot, which is just 2 M12 nuts that I fuse welded together and onto this 80x80mm square tubing. And I can just put the candle inside here, and that is enough heat for the solder to melt. But sometimes I get impatient and I use a little bit of heat from the blowtorch. So that little brick, we're going to solder on the nipples to the Bowden cables. But in preparation for that, we need to bird cage the ends, which basically means to fray the ends so that they create a larger surface area inside the nipple. For that, I have also fabricated a little DIY bird caging tool. If you want to see how you can make your own, then I'm going to link you the video right here. You just need some 6mm angle iron and a bit of 6mm rod. This gives you a very nice bird cage. So let me quickly show you how it works. The tool goes in the vise, and this can be used for 1.5, 2 and 2.5mm Bowden cables. Don't forget to put the nipple on at this point. And then we just have to put the wire in the right slot. Then I fabricated 3 different rods, one for each size. That goes in here. And there we have our bird cage. So that's a nice preparation for the soldering process. We're just going to feed in some of the solder into the honeypot, and you can see this is already liquid. Now for this I would recommend to wear a pair of glasses because the hot solder can fly out and you don't want to get that in your eye. Now the first step is to dip the nipple into the liquid flux and try to just cover the nipple, because if you get flux on the cable, then the solder is also going to stick to the cable, and the whole point of using a honeypot is to prevent that. And straight after that into the solder. Right, and that looks perfect. Once you're done, you can actually leave the old solder in there. It's going to get cold, and when you have to use it again, you just reheat it. The last thing that you might have to do is to file away a little bit of the excess if you have some. But I feel like with this method, it's almost perfect. This is how it comes out of the honeypot. And as you can see here, there's no solder sticking to the cable, which is perfect because it stays flexible right to the end. All right, so let's put everything on the bike. We have to take the outer tubes back out. It's much better to have this straight so that the Bowden cable can run through it freely. Otherwise, you might end up kinking one of the little strands. So now these go back through the bike, through the adjustment screw and into the hook mechanism right here at the bottom of the carb. And this is where I'm gonna install the screwable nipple. Like this, I know exactly where I have to cut it, but if you don't have a nipple like this, you can just mark it right below the hole and then you also know where to cut it. This one was barely long enough, so give it a little bit more slack, but fortunately it worked and we still have enough room to make a birdcage. Now it's important to quickly double check if you have everything on there. We have the nipple, the adjustment screw, end cap. So now the last step before we reinstall them is to oil the Bowden cable. For that, there is a nice little tool that looks like this. It's not super expensive. How this works is with a big hole facing towards the end cap, you want to push this over the Bowden cable, secure everything with this screw. And then here's a small hole where you can spray the Teflon spray in. Move the Bowden cable up and down so it comes all the way down. And then you do this and spray until it drips out of the bottom. Now I have one last thing that I need to do, and that is to put 2 little grub screws into the bottom of the throttle body. That way I hope I can lock the Bowden cables at a very specific angle so that they don't touch the tank. That worked quite well. Unfortunately, I had to drill through from the front because I couldn't get that adjustment screw out here. It has a rivet on the other side. You don't really see it too much. So I think that should be fine. And also it's going to be covered with a rubber boot, so you won't be able to see it at all unless you take that off. And tapping the thread actually worked very well. So now we can put everything back on the bike. And that's the throttle cable done. I'm very happy with how this went. I would say the process was a success and I hope it helps you in any kind of form. Take everything with a pinch of salt, as I've done this for the first time myself. As always, thank you very much for watching and I'll see you in the next one.